Welcome to Richer Souls, Sohale Sizar. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up? And how much did your family and school teach you about money?
So I was born and raised near New Hope, Pennsylvania, essentially there, and a very homogeneous neighborhood where I really had to learn to have my own emotional management and with dealings, for example, with bullying or whatever the case may be. And so I had the sense of transcending. And so when I was a young age, I said, I want to make an impact in the world. I feel like I'm created to make an impact on the world. Every turn that I try to do that in my school, I was told, you're not good enough. You're not a good enough writer. You're not a good violinist. You're not maybe smart enough, etc. And that was just opportunities for me to transcend. So it was actually an environment where I had to learn to rely on who I am, my ancestry, and my faith, honestly. And in terms of money, what's interesting is my mom growing up, she would have all these tapes of investing when I was like 4 or 5. We'd be in the car. I was in car seat. And it was like these investment tapes of how do you invest in the stock market and whatever. And it was playing. I was just like, this is so cool. And then yeah, go for it. You're gonna say something.
Well, how does a 5-year-old, 4-year-old go, this is so cool? Like most kids are like, turn that noise off.
I don't know why, but I just love the analytics, thinking. It was just so fun to me. I loved hearing it, and the way they spoke about it, it just attracted me. In middle school, we had and actually at one point, even in the elementary school, later in the elementary school, we had a fake stock program, where many students do that, and I loved doing that, and that's really what started off, this idea of and confidence, maybe hopefully for in a positive way of managing and getting into entrepreneurship.
So I guess school was just basically the stock program. And then did your mom actually ever invest, or was she always just listening?
Yeah, they still wish they held on to that Amazon stock in 1999. I'll tell you that, or whatever it was at that time. Yeah, it was in the 90s. So they were active in investing. And really, it's simple. My father, he's a consultant in electrical engineering. So really, just a hardworking man. My mom at one point was a VP in banking. But growing up, she was a stay-at-home mom, but she had always this passion, and that translated to me. It almost became like a fun thing for me and her. Um, so yeah,
So she had conversations with you then around it.
absolutely. Mostly fear, but like we should sell. um, but then my father was on the other side, very even keeled, and so understanding, actually, in some ways, removing emotion. I think you talked about that too yourself, where it's like there's some level of objectivity, a sense of peace, a sense of understanding of greater forces, especially macroeconomic forces, in making decisions.
Yeah, it money's very emotional, and the fear of losing money is extremely emotional in the sense that that's much worse the desire to make money. I've heard that from internal thing, like if you're watching your stock portfolio drop, the internal emotion is like a tiger just jumped out of the woods at you. And people are set off very much in the same way, which probably explains why there's so much fear when the markets tend to
Yeah,
drop and people freak.
especially these days. It's funny to mention that as an entrepreneur, you have to really manage money well, and so you basically, so I've done this a couple times now, where you go to venture capitalists, you raise money, and the idea is that you have a runway, right? You say, you raise a million, 1.5, whatever it is. You say, I have 24 months of runway. This is how I'm spending it, and so there's a looming deadline. I got to get to a certain level of profitability, or the ability to have strong metrics if I want to raise another round in order to keep going. And so at that point, you have to be very savvy about how you're managing, and where you're investing and why. And it's funny you mentioned, even today I was having another conversation about how we can more effectively do that, um, to really tighten the ship.
It's funny because that shifted, I think, within the last year or two. Before that, VC was like, you're not spending enough, burn more cash. And I always have a, I've always had a love hate relationship with them because I'm like, the purpose of business is to make money, not burn money.
Yeah,
So when you tell people to burn money, they will. You have to look at what are their intentions. And honestly, the average VC guy, he's not looking to hit a home run. He's not even looking to hit a grand slam, right? He wants to win the World Series. And if he's not winning the World Series, he just wants to go home. And they create that weird dichotomy. And if a business owner doesn't know what he's stepping into, I think mentally it can be pretty difficult.
I think you're right, and I can attest to the emotional stress, and that's why my learning has been get to profitability, and that's the goal with my current venture, which is like if you have the ability to determine your financial future. We do have investors, and I think those investors are very different, for example, than once you get to a Series A or a Series B. Once you're really raising 5, 10, 20 million, because at that point you lose a lot of control, and it really depends on who you have a partnership with, right? You have to be very careful about who you're bringing on board, because there's plenty of stories of folks who just they were fired from their own companies or whatever the case may be.
It's like getting married. There's the dating where everything's wonderful, and then there's the reality of what in the hell did I get myself into? And
I'm single, but I'll take from what I've heard from others, for better or for worse, aligns with what you just said.
well, it's true, like I won't throw women under the bus, but they're like, I'll change him, and they've got their desire of what the expectation is, and the guy doesn't think that way. And it's the same thing with VC. Yeah, we'll tell them, after the fact.
Well, I mean, that's why it's so important to have the values aligned in the beginning, right?
It
Where
is.
you really have a shared purpose, vision, mission. This is how we're going to get there, um, and also values, right? I mean, I said values earlier, but value like ethical values, right? Because now we're living in a day and age where there's a lot of sensitive information, even more so than ever, especially with AI, right? And so, how do we manage that? And so that's another element that's more and more important. And you're looking at these companies who have had to let go of CEOs or chairmen for various ethical and you would probably just say reputational um, issues, who probably were really good businessmen and women, but they because of just character, or a character misstep, they've had to go.
And that happens. Now, as a kid, you were always extremely curious, weren't
Absolutely. I mean, I read voraciously. Yeah, yeah. And I actually, when I wanted to, at first I had it. So I was 9 years old. I had an idea to cure AIDS, using genetic therapy, and I learned all about this because I was just read a ton. And I spent 5 years sending letters to PhD labs all across the country. And I'm a 9 year or 11-year old or 9-year old. Yeah, I have an idea. This is what it is. Yada yada yada. And of course, I got a lot of no's. I got a lot of encouragement, like come to the lab. We'll spend a day here. But I was like, no, I want to be I want to be studying this idea. So eventually, when I was in high school, I got into a PhD lab, and I spent two years, 2 summers in the lab, and pipetting and all of that stuff. And I realized, listen, this takes just too much patience. I got to do something.
Yeah, and I can tie that back to what we were talking about before. Too often what we think is going to happen or our glamour of what it is, isn't actually the reality. And I think that happens a lot with the American dream too.
Mm,
People expect something and they've got this vision in their head,
yeah.
which does not match reality at all.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and you and I both know this. How many people have we seen who seemingly have so much, but yet are so unhappy and so alone? Loneliness is a big one, actually, because it's harder to trust. I know a lot of folks who, may have a lot or may have a certain level of notoriety, but they can't trust those around them. They struggle to really build deeper relationships. It's hard, and so there's a cost to some of these things that, especially maybe, well, really anyone can think that they'd like to have.
And there's a lot of reasons about that. Some of it from childhood, some of it
Yeah.
from other situations, and some of it money does strange things to people. So you get the 2 summers in the PhD lab, you realize you don't like it. What happened next?
Yeah, so I said, let me go to the next best thing, which was being a doctor, which might have thrilled my Persian mom. And so I said, I want to be neuroscience because I loved neuroscience. I mean, I read all these books about the different neurotransmitters, cortisol and dopamine and this and that. And so I started exploring that. And here's the blessing. I think every person should do this. A lot of us ask about what's my purpose? Like, what should I do, et cetera. And I think the blessing I got to have is I got to try so many different things. So I got to experience some time with some doctors. And I realized, well, I don't want to do that the rest of my life. And so then I said, well, I really love law, And so then I actually interned with a judge and a lawyer. Realized, I don't want to do that the rest of my life. Okay, maybe I want to be in politics or public policy or something like that. And studied it in college. Ended up doing a fellowship at Princeton. They're like, no, you shouldn't do it. And throughout all the experiences, from being at the White House to working for, local politicians to starting and growing my own nonprofit, I realized that the common denominators were all consumers. If I want to make an impact, I should start with that common denominator.
Are politicians happy?
You'd have to ask them.
Well, you were hanging out in the White House. I figure you might have noticed behind the scenes.
I think we become desensitized to what we get to have, and the opportunity that each one of us has is to realize the fullness and really leveraging gratitude and to discover how we are full in every moment of life. Because think about it, I don't know about you, Rocky, if you had a car at one point that you really wanted or something, whatever object or idea, I'm sure there was, for many there was, then you get it, right? There's a day that you get it. Week goes by, 2 weeks goes by. That's like, okay, you desensitize to it. That's, it's psychologically, there's research backs that. And it's like, now what? Okay, now I got this. Now what's next? It just, it doesn't stop. And, we have thousands of years of philosophers talking about it.
There's always a nicer car, a nicer house, a nicer airplane, a nicer boat, right? It's always what's next. And it's amazing how the journey too is enjoyable, but once you get there, it doesn't take long for it to wear off. And I don't know if you've had any exit yet, but I know people who've had exits and they're
Yeah.
like, they have 9-figure exit. So, game over money. And they're like, the day finally comes. It's stressful to get to that point. And they finally get wired the money and they look at the bank account and there's the millions of dollars finally. And they're like, that's it.
Now what?
Now what? It's like this massive letdown. There's not even jubilation. And it's kind of funny how that is with life. So you do the public policy in the White House, you decide you don't want it, and then
And so I was a senior in undergrad, and I basically, a friend of mine said, you would be most likely fit for Stanford. I said, well, Stanford business school. I said, okay, that's not going to be, I'm 21 or whatever. I'm not going to get in and et cetera. But he said, listen, I'm visiting DC. I'm going to go to this event, Stanford event. You should join. I said, reluctantly, I went. And I went because I wanted to see him. I didn't really care, or, I was very skeptical. Hear the presentation. They sell me. I apply. I end up getting to Stanford Business School. And I get 2 years to do whatever I want to do. At that point, I ended up going to Cambridge to do a fellowship in business and leadership, and then do a little bit of independent consulting, as well as just tinkering on different ideas before starting Stanford Business School. So, my family is in business, and so I've seen also the impact that they had. And so when I got in and seeing their impact, I felt conviction that I can leverage the power of entrepreneurship to scale something that's really meaningful. Just to note, when I was 18, I published a prayer app that it went viral. We had about 500,000 people who downloaded it and use it, and I saw the power of technology at that point. I was 18 years old, and once I got letters and things from people around the world, I said, "There's no way I could join McKinsey or some consulting firm." Although, no offense to them, I think.
And that's interesting. What happened next?
Well, I went to when I was in my first year of school, of grad school. I noticed that a lot of my classmates were apprehensive to open up and share positivity and gratitude. So I created this thing called Love Notes, where people could send notes of positivity, but anonymous. And people were blown away. They had no idea what people were like. Rocky, imagine you finding out what people really think about you because it's anonymous and they're being real. And it's not just like you're great, it's like real. And it was all positive, really. There wasn't a single note of hate. And it ends up going viral to different schools. And so when I was graduating business school, I had an option. I could have gone to real estate. Actually, my first offer going out of undergrad was a private equity offer. I said no to that. So there's a life of private equity that I could have, venture capital, whatever the case may be. But I said, let me scale. If I can scale this ability for people to be vulnerable to one another, that would be worth living for. And so that led to Illume. And that was a 5-year journey. It was acquired in December, this December 2023, this last December. And basically what it was a celebration platform that brings people together to share notes of positivity and gratitude, even money for a group gift for anyone in the country. And so it was very powerful, obviously, during COVID and the remote time where people could come together. And we've had more than 400 notes sent. And Kudo Board was the acquirer. And they've now leveraging our patent and all these other things in order to enhance that experience for millions of others.
Why do you think people just didn't tell other people?
Fear of being judged. I'm too weak to, I fear of rejection, fear of being seen as being weak. Sometimes having emotions on our sleeve is a weak thing. And so I believe it's fear for sure.
Interesting. And I guess that's programmed into us at some point, right?
I mean, absolutely. I actually, as you know, some of the best techniques of marketing is fear oriented. It's like, you have only a week for this to go, you're going to lose it. Don't miss out on that. Right. I mean, and these things, they tap into this evolutionary element, and it translates into conversions and money and, financial success for folks. So we keep perpetuating, right? So if it's working, well, hey, we'll keep using it. And sometimes it's a tough game to kind of navigate, because you would wish folks would take a decision based off of a place of proactiveness or abundance. But sometimes it's what's fear.
Yeah, it's funny if you notice on social media, they're not promoting love.
No.
I guess it doesn't sell. I don't know, but it does. But that's weird.
Well, it makes sense. And I'll tell you why. Because if the mindset, if the narrative inwardly is I am less, then you are always hungry. And when you're always hungry, you need to consume. And when you consume, you spend. And when you spend, we have more successful businesses. So, it's really coming from that angle. Now, I'm building another venture now, and I'm tapping into this need for, because there's a shadow aspect of scarcity, but then there's another, I would say, positive, which is I can be better. I can grow. I can learn, which is positive. And there's millions of people who are trying to be better, who are spending to be better, and hopefully get to that place where they can say, I am full. And gratitude is what does that, right? I mean, it recognizes the abundance that you have.
Yeah, when I coached kids in soccer, I used a simple 3-letter word. It was yet. They're like, I don't know how to do that. And I'd say yet.
Well
And
said.
that opened possibility. And once we have possibility, then we can work on doing it. Speaking of that, you have an interesting story that I want to ask about, and it's about the words that we use.
Yeah.
You actually had a linguistics coach, didn't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Tell me, What was that all about?
Yeah, so this individual he actually started off as a friend. He's a serial entrepreneur, very successful, and he basically sat down with me and said, "Listen, I want to tell you something that changed my life, but I feel like you need this." I went, "So what is it? What do you want to preach to me?" And he said that, "Listen, the way you're speaking, it's always in negatives. I don't know, maybe not. I can't. Let's see." Like it was more scarcity oriented versus abundance. So we started talking, you know, just he started analyzing my language. He said, "Just speak. What do you want? What are your wishes? What are your desires?" And so I started speaking, and he started writing it out, and I was like, "Oh my god, look how negative!" And so we started rewording these core desires and reframing the abundant and creating affirmations around them. And I had to say the affirmations every day. And it totally transformed my mindset because what we say to ourselves is what we see outwardly, right? The more we see joy and abundance, the more we perceive it.
Our words drive our thoughts, which essentially drive our attitude. It
Yeah.
all goes together. I know
Yeah.
there's a whole thing. I don't remember exactly how it is, but your words are super powerful. And I think a lot of times people aren't even aware. Like, I'm guessing you weren't aware.
I was not. No.
It's interesting to do that. Well, now that we've got AI, maybe we can just have AI just record our conversations and give us feedback on that.
How we can reframe our sentences. And words really do carry energy. And so I think there was one of your guests in the past was talking about this of like, how do you have wealth and abundance? And a lot of times it's the words that we're using, right? If we're using these words that are abundant filled, then we're calling in abundance.
And it's true because I notice people's money words. Like, you'll be sitting there and there'll be a conversation going on, and somebody will be like, "Oh, I went to this fancy restaurant," and the other person will be like, "That must be nice. That'll never happen for me." And I'm like, interesting script going on
Yeah,
there, right?
yeah, yeah,
They're limiting their ability and they're holding themselves back. Again, it comes back to what you talked about, which is I am less, which I think, at the core of everything is, am I enough?
yeah. Well said.
Yeah, I after reading all the psychology books, which are all parenting books, I realize how much the parents mess up the kids, and it all comes down to, are you enough and do you feel loved by your mom and dad?
Yeah, yeah. It's super, super beautiful distillation of this. And I think I would even go one step deeper, which is that I am. I mean, am I enough? I am enough, regardless of our outer circumstances. Which it sounds like I'm saying this. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But subconsciously, it's amazing how much we pin our self worth to things outside of it. I mean, the littlest things, even how we get seated at a restaurant, or how someone speaks. I mean, it's just like amazing. And so, for me, I've had to even go deeper of asking the question, "Who am I? Am I enough? Who's I?" And what I love about, as you may have heard, there's this incredible saint, Paramahansa Yogananda, and he talks about who we are, and he talks about us being this divine spirit, etc. And whatever your belief system is, whether you believe it's consciousness, universe, God, however you want to frame it, there's this idea for thousands of years from incredible mystics and luminaries that we are more than just our ego, that we, the definition of abundance, we meaning our existence and even our evolution, even our change, even our transformation is the prayer or the being of the being. I mean, this is very mystical, but that realization is even more of a door and more of an opening of understanding abundance. And
The way I look at that is we are all unique in our own way. We're each given unique skills. We don't we don't value or realize what unique skill we have, and that the fact that it is valuable and different, we just assume everyone can do that, and we don't always find our fit with ourselves, so to speak. And when you can find your fit and you can figure out who you are and what you're made of and what you love
yeah,
doing, and then you can figure out how to take that into the world in a way that people value it and give you money, then that's where fun begins.
Yeah.
It
Well
took
said.
me most of my life to figure that out. Hopefully, there's a faster way. Have you found a faster way to figure this out?
It's experimentation, you know. And I think you asked about my story like earlier. That's what I got to do. Like, but I have to take another step back on that, which was that I had parents. So I'll give you an interesting example. My parents, they said to me, my dad, he had always a dream to be a surgeon. His dad said to him, "No, you're not going to be a surgeon. You're going to be an engineer." And my dad could have been an amazing surgeon, but he said, "Okay, I'll be an engineer." So he becomes an engineer because at the time, you know, growing up, they were a little bit more obedient. Let's put it that way. It's like you're going to go to school, you're going to go for that. So, however you want to phrase it, obedience, whatever. But long story short, he wanted these opportunities that, and it wasn't a question of finance. It was just a question of opinion. His dad could afford, but it was just simply opinion. So when he was raising me, my parents, they basically said, listen, we want you to pursue what you want to believe. We're going to support you. Now I have another cousin, and the way his parents raised him is in a sense to be very conscious about every dime, but he's almost obsessing over it. And thankfully there's a number of them, so they can, you know, figure out amongst themselves who I'm talking about. And it goes to the sense of also how we're raised, right? I mean, you talked about like figuring out. Well, I got to have the opportunity to experiment. Someone was backing me to do that, and some people don't have that in life. And so, really, just figuring out how we can experiment with that, regardless of our circumstance, to find what that unique thing is that you're talking about. That's important.
You know, it's funny because I've asked this question of hundreds of people, and what I've learned is even if two kids grow up in the same household
Yeah.
with the same struggles, one of them will come out of it going, I will never be in poverty. I'm going to figure a way out. And the other one will be like, well, I guess I'm going to be in poverty and debt for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so it's also the internalization of whether we accept it or don't accept it, how we kind of play it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that comes also down then to our narratives of ourselves, right? I mean, if we believe that we're less, then we're going to say that, you know, say the second, the latter of what you just shared. And if it's the former, then it's the former. So, yeah, I mean, the way we're raised is just so important. You're right. I mean, I know you have your father too. And so I'm sure they're happy about you, but you know, you know that it's definitely a journey being a parent.
Yeah. Well, and I tell people the number one obstacle keeping you from whatever it is that you want is you. It's the reflection in the mirror. Go
Yeah.
face it,
Yeah.
deal with it,
Yeah.
get over yourself, and then we'll go from there. So we keep talking about gratitude. How do we have gratitude? Like, how do I wake up full of this every single day?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I struggled with it for many years. I would have a journal, and then one time I even got an accountability buddy that said, we're going to do this. You and me, Sohale, a friend of mine. I did it for 5 days and then I failed. And so I started just writing an email to myself. I just would write what I'm grateful for. I'd schedule send it. It'd come back to my inbox. I'd reply to it, schedule send it. I ended up doing it for 3 years. And I learned through that a few things. One, I had to be merciful with myself. Maybe I'm not doing it every day, but I'm doing it at least a few times a week. And maybe I'm not writing paragraphs, but maybe I'm doing at least one or two lines. And even that, which led to insight number two, can have an impact. The ability to be even kind and merciful to myself was empowering for me to continue going and continue building that habit. And then lastly, speaking in a way that works for me. You know, some people writing in a journal works for them. For other people, it doesn't. We all are different. Some people don't like to write. They like to talk. You should be able to do it, you know, talk, do a voice memo or a video or a photo, whatever it is. And that led actually to the inspiration of what I'm doing today.
I get these text messages and they go, what are you grateful for? Start with, I am grateful for, and we'll add it to the like. So I get reminded to do my gratitude entry into my text message and
And
keeps
what's
me on.
that?
Uh, I'm going to have to figure this one out.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. I can tell you about the
somebody
one I have
gave
to
it
offer.
somebody gave it to me through a group. Take 2 MINS, so it's short for take 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Dot.
So I can better one up that.
I'm sure you do. Somebody sent this to me as part of a group I was in, and it just keeps doing it, and I keep talking to it.
It's funny. I mean,
No, go ahead.
well, I was going to say is that you mentioned about text message, you mentioned about replying to it. I mean, it's exactly what and more actually of what we're envisioning. We're envisioning to, I would say, I'm envisioning to reduce the anxiety of 95 million people by 2030. Why? Because it's such an important issue that we're all experiencing as humans. And as we talked about this conversation, gratitude is a key part of that. And so, how do we make that really easy? How do we make it simple? How do we make it friendly in the way that we live? Not an ideal, but as a part of who we are and how we live.
Well, and it's also a mindset shift, right? Thinking about things, because I think too often we take things for granted
Yeah,
until we don't have them.
yeah, yeah.
So for
Fortunately,
me, I'm a pretty simple guy. Hot water in the shower in the morning, I'm very grateful for that, right?
yeah, I agree with that.
um, I know what it's like to get into the cold, and I don't like that. But it's such a simple thing that we don't think about. We don't think about the electricity.
Yeah,
Um,
you're right.
we don't, these days people may have a love-hate relationship with Zoom or whatever, but the fact is we can connect across the
Yeah,
world,
yeah, yeah.
face to face, meet people. And I've noticed even just I'm learning to have a lot more gratitude for the things I have. And when you start to do that, it does shift the way you look at things. And it does take things down into a calmer level.
Well, that's what the data show. I mean, you have 30 years of gratitude research and very strong research that shows that. I mean, we all know that gratitude can increase happiness, joy, contentment. But did you know that it increases your quality of sleep? Did you know it increases your lifespan? Did you know it increases your cardiovascular, improves your cardiovascular health, boosts your immune system? Even your tolerance to pain is improved from those who have gratitude versus those who don't. There's a great study, just as an example of one of the things I mentioned, where they had two groups of people. They had two heart patients, right? Two groups of heart patients. One did a gratitude journal, one didn't. The one that did the gratitude journal, it's even with controlling those who don't, had better heart health. When you controlled all the other variables as a part of the study. The point is that it's that powerful. Shifting your mindset is that powerful. But it requires something that you talked about earlier, which is looking in the mirror. You talked about having that self-awareness. You talked about having that understanding of who you are, right? And this idea of getting you out of the way. Well, I would say it's understanding who you are and recognizing the abundance, not dismissing maybe the challenges. No one's talking about dismissing them or trivializing them. You can have challenges. We all, as human beings, have as a part of life. Um, but it's also about recognizing what we get to have.
It is. You made a comment which reminded me of something. I've been listening to these lectures from the Heart Mind Institute, and one of the speakers I think is with the Heart Math Group. And what they were talking about is the mind is actually not the first brain to receive and to think these things. It actually occurs within the heart. And that is where it is picked up. And then the heart sends the signal to the mind, kind of towards that gratitude and so forth.
It's so beautiful you say that because one thing that I've learned about is that the energy of the heart is actually 60 times more powerful than the brain. 60, which is incredible. And you think about growing up, and I'm thinking about me. I'll talk about from my experience how much my heart, candidly, was subordinated to my mind. Right? I mean, getting good grades and passing tests, etc. It wasn't a test of your heart or showing your heart. It's just like, how are you thinking, right? Which is fine. But what is wrong See, I just, by the way, step back. I could say what isn't fine, which is more scarcity oriented statement versus like calling it as it is, which is it is wrong. What is wrong is diminishing the power of the heart. And it's so funny, Rocky. I have had to learn, and I'm sure you know, and others have as well, which is that to relearn to listen to the heart after listening so many years, um, too much to the mind, right? Having more balance.
How many people do you think have, not percentage wise, have the self awareness to look inside and to do these things?
The first reaction is I don't know, but I would say that I think it's very few, unfortunately, because it is a. I feel like our society from a very young age is designed in such a way to condition us away from this, and we have to relearn. Now, here's the relearn what it means to be ourselves, to grow, and to realize that we're not consumers, just consumers. Our common denominator is the humanity. And it's important. I mean, listen, some may say, well, that's naive. Not necessarily. If we see ourselves the commonality, we actually have more customers. We can build more relationships. We can grow. We can lower cost of acquisition, word of mouth, etc. Right? There's actually a business benefit of seeing this in that way.
Why do you think this occurs? Like, what's the motive behind it? Or is it just, I don't know.
Well, I think what it is that it's we like easy. Who doesn't like easy? Like, if someone said you got to climb this mountain, go to the top, or hey, you can sit here and just have a drink. But I think it was like, I'll just sit here, right? We'll make it really nice for you. And I think we are a capitalistic society, and so when we see that certain conditions, like a fear-based marketing or whatever it is, are able to get folks to convert and get and you create this cyclical cycle, and you want to expand your audience. Uh, those incentives, those financial incentives are there. I believe, the system is there to create such a situation for humanity.
So you haven't created a gratitude pill yet?
I've created gratitude software. I've created gratitude software that I'm proud about and has transformed my life and many others, which is something very noteworthy for me personally.
Let's talk about that. Before we do, though, I want to take a quick step back because you talk about opening the heart. And one of the things I've noticed, and we've had guests on who talk about this, there are certain psychedelics that are known specifically as heart openers. They
Yeah,
literally help people. Let's just say we put up a barricade
yeah,
or armor, they knock it off like that.
yeah,
Now, it's not to say it's not going to come back, because it
yeah,
will, but they create that glimpse of, hey, this is what it could look like.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, so there's like a few points about psychedelics. I think the first one being is that it's clear that they have power to transform our minds and hearts. When you look at the studies that were happening in the '60s and then subsequently, they have a power to impact in a positive way if done in a intelligent manner or in a way that's really aligned with the heart. Let's put it that way. Having said that, we do see a commercialization of this, and why? In my opinion, it's just to make money, right? I mean, like, and so what a lot of folks, as we talked earlier, like folks, and many of us, myself included, like I like life to be more comfortable and easy. Do I want it to be more hard? No, but that's how I've been growing, whether I like it or not. So, for many folks, this short circuitry, this kind of cheat code is what's being offered. And if you come into it with that perspective, you're going to be disappointed, and many are. And many folks are now maybe treating it as an idol. Many folks are actually realizing, hey, that's not an end in itself. It can be a tool. And I think that's worth noting because I hear so much positive talk about it, which is great. And it's great to talk about these things that at one point were shunned. Having said that, it's also worth noting that there are other interests behind it, that by knowing yourself deeply and opening those psychological knots through a process that's organic, you actually have a longer lasting healing journey and a longer lasting opportunity to really get to know and open up the heart.
So Is that what your software does?
Yes, I would say
So let's
so. I
talk
mean,
about that.
I would say we had actually a student. So we've been piloting it at Stanford. One of our pilots was at Stanford University, and we had someone basically say, I was looking to book therapy appointments at the university, and every time I go, it's like booked. It's like it's busy, and so by the time I would get an appointment, Soul would just remind me that life is great. And so what I basically have done is I built this tool. It's text message based. It's based on 3 years of spontaneous nudges. And so you sign up online, you put in your number, you get to choose if you want iMessage, WhatsApp, or SMS, and you get these spontaneous nudges over text message. Now the spontaneity is like basically means maybe I get a message on Monday or Thursday, and it creates long-term engagement because you just don't know when you're going to receive it. So what do you receive? You receive a gratitude prompt, and you can reply to that prompt with a video, a photo, voice memo, and the prompts are meaningful. They touch all these areas of life that maybe you don't think about, from touch, smell, taste, who in your life. And it becomes this really easy way to remember all the moments you're loved with simple text messages. With the voice memo, you can talk to it, send a voice memo what you're grateful for. All of that's encrypted on this online journal. And you can print that out into a book, mug, bracelet. But here's really what's awesome, Rocky. This is what I believe is transformational, because this gratitude, the gratitude that you share, actually reveals where you find joy in your life. It can reveal what is your purpose. It can reveal your personality. It can reveal the level of compassion that you have and that you need to receive. And so we're leveraging that data to offer folks a mirror that reflects their most beautiful self by showing the psychological insights of themselves, their level of compassion, passion, joy, as well as providing recommendations based off of their psychologies of practitioners, workshops, events, classes, books, podcasts that would be helpful for them. Yes, we can add you there too. um, helpful for them to discover and deepen their inner joy. And that's Soul. I call it the Google for wellness.
Do you have some favorite stories of some people who have had great results?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, a few. I would say the first one I mentioned, which about that student and basically not needing therapy as much, which was incredible. The second one, we have one individual in particular who really just like everyone else, she graduated from graduate school. She was looking for, trying to feel more happy, especially and joyful, and reducing the anxiety in transitioning from school to work. She had a journal. Just like me, she couldn't do it, and she started doing it. But for months, she would say, "No, I can't do it. I don't have time, etc." But you and I both know, if the longer the time goes, the more you start regretting. Oh, I wish I did this earlier. Right? It's just more and more regret. And so she level of regret, it got to a certain point. She said, yeah, I should do this. Like I need to make a change. And the result that she found is not only did she, she's based in New York, not only did she find more inner joy and peace, but she was actually able to empower her professional search, and ultimately allowed her to feel a sense of abundance in showing up in her interview process. And she found an incredible opportunity that she's so happy for, and grateful for. So, that's another example. Another individual was able to restart his career as a photographer, and he transformed his life of seeing himself as a photographer to a creative director, where he's working with some of the most renowned celebrities in the world because of just shifting his mindset. And that was through starting with Soul.
Were they all at Stanford?
No, none of them went to
Oh,
Stanford. Actually,
okay. I wasn't
the
the
ones
one.
students, the students who have the testimonials. Yeah, those are students at Stanford. The rest of those two that I mentioned, no.
No, that's fine. I wasn't sure if you were doing a study out of there or something. So that makes a lot of sense. Is there science behind this? What is really kind of occurring that such simple text messages or a voice memo or this is
Yeah,
making such a massive difference?
yeah. So we're leveraging a lot of unique psychological research that has come out in the last 5 to 8 years, and one of them is a very famous professor. Yes, he's at Stanford. I'm sorry, B.J. Fogg, who
I
talks
know
about
BJ Fogg.
yeah, and he talks about what's needed to create a habit. right? And one is this the motivation to be there, right? And then the ability to do it. It's actually a pretty simple formula. And so the motivation for many of us is that we want to do it, but if we can reduce the cognitive load or the ability, basically making it very easy to do, then we're more likely to make the habit. And that's exactly what we did. You know, having a journal like this, this one right next to me, actually, that's tough to do. How many folks of us have the time? How many folks of us have the opportunity to sit down every night or every other night, turn on the candle and write? It's tough, but we're all on our phones. So why did we decide to use text message? Because text message, we know, is very simple. Even reducing the cognitive load of downloading an app. How many of us want to download an app? Not many of us. App fatigue is a very real thing. So we made so many product decisions that were informed of this ability of how do we reduce the cognitive load based off of BJ Fogg's research to make it so easy to build a habit. And that's what we see there. And then the other element of it is spiritual, candidly. It's based off of the findings and understandings of masters and luminaries, spiritual luminaries over the past few hundred years. This is something I've been researching for the last 10 years, and I've incorporated into building soul.
Let's talk about that further. But just a quick reminder for everyone, BJ Fogg came up with tiny habits. So his process is pretty simple. Like people are like, I need to floss my teeth. That's a big ask, right? You go to the dentist, everyone lies, whatever. And BJ Fogg's like, hey, here's how we do tiny habits. Okay. First, you got to pick an anchor. After I brush my teeth, you start a tiny habit. I will floss one tooth, right? It's like, I'm going to go to the gym and all I'm going to do is walk around the gym and look at people exercising, and then you can leave. So all he's doing is the least amount of friction. And what he says is when you just start to do this, little by little, you wear yourself down and you just keep doing more and more. And then you do one tooth and then you're like, all right, I'll do the second tooth. And then, eventually you just kind of keep progressing like this.
Great articulation.
Yeah. I mean, he's phenomenal at that whole concept of basically tiny habits. Make it simple. And even just like, if there's if you want to read a book, right? So next to my couch is a table full of all the books I need to read. Yeah. So when I sit down, I just grab the one that interests me at the moment. I start reading it. And I made sure to put a light next to the couch so I can see. And that's the key. But if the book were on a bookshelf somewhere, it ain't getting read. That's just it, right?
Absolutely.
So if there's things you want, put them right in front of you. And that's, I think, the concept. Everyone's already texting like crazy. As a matter of fact, these days, forget about emailing people. They don't answer, but they will answer their text message.
Yep.
Hopefully. So you've caught on to trends to kind of make that better. Let's dig into this spiritual side, though. Talk to me more about the spiritual side of gratitude and how that looks.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question because so there's a few things. One is that gratitude reveals our abundance, right? Or it reveals how we are loved, really how we are loved. And when we realize how we are loved, we are really tapping into, I would say, the creative energy or the source that inspired all that is. How does that make sense? How does that make sense? From me feeling love to seeing that. Well, you realize that everything and everyone in some reason or some way has been afforded some level of abundance. Even that ant that's walking and going, through the cracks in the sidewalk has its resource. And so the realization becomes that in order for this to be, there's some element of mercy as well. Mercy in the sense of that we get to have versus it's get to be assumed, right? And so this idea of getting to have is, part of traditions, you name it. I mean, from every mystical tradition or spiritual tradition, you think about, I know Paramahansa Yogananda talks about this. I know Gandhi, he talks about this. Mr. Rogers talks about this. Anne Frank in her diaries talks about this. Brene Brown, she talks about this, even though from the psychological lens, but she talks about this. So this idea that you can essentially experience your own divinity by realizing your abundance and ultimately that you are enough. Now, how has that played into soul? This is what I love. Our product philosophy is to create a mirror that reflects that you are fully full or you're fully enough. It's that mirror. It's not about like, I had actually one investor, he said to me, we got to figure out how we can, get them to engage with you more, and you have to add more resources, and you got to add more this and this and that, like me basically adding more and more and more. And I said to him, no, that's not how I'm thinking about it. The way I'm thinking about it is we have to build the best mirror that reflects their inner self. And that's then translated to show this concept that I call the soul light type. And the soul light is actually based upon Sufi texts of spiritual alchemy. And the idea is that there's 6 primordial settings of being a human, which is north, south, east, west, height, and depth, right? That's how you get the universe. And so you essentially, on each of those settings, there are meditations that reflect divinity. And they're essentially metaphorical in many ways too. And so, for example, like north, the idea of north, something being north, there's an element of winter, south being summer, east being beginning, resurrection, west being nostalgia, etc. And so what we've done is now we even tell you what is your soul light. What your soul light represents is how do you find joy from your soul, from really your essence. And this is something that really has yet to be pioneered. We hear about human body design, gene keys, you name it. This is something that's esoteric that really, has been close to the chest for many, many, many centuries that I'm sharing with others.
I like it.
That's a lot that I shared, I know.
No, it's perfectly fine. I mean, I think all of these things tie together. And I've always said there are certain universal laws. When you can figure them out, they always work. Like gravity. It doesn't matter where you are. You don't even have to be on the planet for gravity to work. It's a universal law. And I think there are a lot of these that once you start to understand them and you can tap into them, then you have the ability to make it work for you. So let's do a little BJ Fogg. Let's make it easy for people. How do we remove all the friction if someone wants to check this?
Yeah, so they go to bringsoul.life or www.bringsoul.life in less than 30 seconds. We ask you only 3 questions. You can sign up and then you'll get your text message and you'll then get started with the process and you'll get those spontaneous nudges of gratitude that you can reply to. It's really that easy. Just sign up online, and the promo, I'd love to gift it to your audience or, for 30 days, at least on me. And so they can use the promo, the word, THEWORD, like dog, and they'll have 30 days to try it out and see if it works for them.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Of course, absolutely. It's really a pleasure to be chatting with you. You ask great questions. Gotta give it to you.
What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Prayer.
Now, see, I thought you were going to say gratitude because it's the number one answer we get.
Prayer is gratitude, and gratitude is a form of prayer.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Be compassionate to myself.
Yeah, that's big, right?
Yeah.
So many people aren't. And I think it's the number one reason everyone's so unhappy. They aren't compassionate to themselves.
Very true.
And then you can't be compassionate to anyone else.
Exactly.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Delay getting into the workforce and learn as much as you can, and definitely time your entry, to what's going to be working best for you. That specific piece of advice. I have other pieces of advice for sure, but that's the specific. I mean, I would, I think if I really had to, like, because you're catching me to say this like off the cuff.
Yeah.
But I would, like, second round of it, I would say the best advice I would say is just try as many things as possible in terms of what lights up your heart.
I think the more you try, the more you start to see, and that's where the connections come in. It's when
Exactly.
you can bring the expertise of various things together and you can see things that others can't is truly where it all kind of comes together. Well, thank you so much for joining us. If people would like to learn more about you, website or where can they go?
Sure. I mean, bringsoul.life, there's an about page right there. They can reach out to me. And they can also reach out to me on Instagram if they want to connect one on one at So Light, So Bright.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you, Rocky. Very grateful for you and our conversation.
Have a wonderful.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for checking out this unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can find the full episode along with all the back episodes at richersoul.com. This podcast is brought to you by Profit Comes First, where we help business owners to have a more profitable and growing business so they can live the life of their dreams. Check that out as well wherever you listen to all this content.